My name, very cool, Cindy, thank you. My name is Vanita Ray, and my pronouns are she, her. I am calling in from Houston, Texas, and welcoming you to our next HINAC session. What is it? Wait, I'm gonna get this wrong if I don't read it. So I'm going, before I do that, so I don't get it wrong, we've got a few housekeeping things we've got to get handled first, and I will call on Jose, our fabulous interpreter, to set some rules for us there, and then we will get started. Oh, Jose, do you need to say anything? I'm sorry. I thought, so I can't, they can't speak. So you should just know that there are interpretation services being delivered, because language justice is racial justice. And so we are doing that. So if you could please, for our speakers, just speak a little slower so that those folks can do their fabulous work on that end. And I want to ask everyone to please mute your mics. There will be time for you to unmute and talk towards the end. And I want to turn our meeting over to Connie.
Thank you so much, Vanita Ray. Welcome, everyone, and thank you. Thank you for being here for our session. Please excuse my nervousness. This is my very first time presenting on a national level, so I'm super nervous and standing in an animal care room, so please forgive the surroundings too. We'll go ahead and get started. We're here to present to you on how to control the narrative when you're not holding the mic. I'm gonna share my screen. And so we went through introductions. We're going to give you a brief history of the Nevada HIV Modernization Coalition. We're going to talk about strategy, how to win by working backwards, an overview, and then we're going to give you Stephan. I'm going to hand it over to Stephan. He's going to give you an overview of our recent HIV mod bill, SB 275, that revises provisions relating to communicable diseases. That was BDR. Bill Draft Resolution 20-220, and then we're going to end with a look forward for our coalition. So our coalition was founded whenever Zero Project came down and did our strategic planning meeting. That was held in early 2019 at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center, or the center in Las Vegas, Nevada. Tammy Howe and Carrie were our co-facilitators, and we brought people from all over the state of Nevada to participate. At this initial meeting, chairs were chosen. We established our name, how often we would meet, and how we would make decisions, which was by consensus, not vote. And that's important for later in the discussion. I included this slide just to give you guys an idea of what we were facing in the beginning. So basically, Nevada's laws that criminalize HIV, there were approximately close to 80 communicable diseases. That the first offense was just a warning, the second offense was a misdemeanor. HIV was the only communicable disease where the first offense was a Class B felony. So that's where we started and what we were working with. So the Nevada HIV Modernization, our guiding principles. So our mission statement is we are a diverse group of individuals who seek to modernize Nevada's criminal HIV laws. These laws were seriously outdated, lacking in scientific merit. These harmful laws criminalize and stigmatize Nevadans living with HIV. They are counterproductive to ending the HIV epidemic in Nevada. We did this by speaking with a collective voice that is anchored in science, informed by the leadership of people living with HIV, and working with public health and policy experts to educate our community, our legislators, the judiciary, and law enforcement officials in order to pass meaningful reform measures. So about us, we are a broad coalition that was created by people living with HIV and our allies, and we are working together to change harmful and discriminatory HIV laws in Nevada. We want to do that to improve public health, advance social justice, humanize people living with HIV, and end HIV criminalization. Our membership consists of community advocates, professors, public health authorities, nonprofit organizational leaders, staff, legal advisors, family members of diverse racial, gender, and sexual backgrounds. Many of us are living with HIV, and we seek to modernize these outdated laws to end inappropriate arrests and prosecutions, unnecessary detentions, excessive bail, and inadequate legal representations of all people living with HIV. So we decided in the beginning that a model law must include criminal intent to transmit and conduct likely to transmit HIV. The punishment must be proportionate to the actual harm. No new crimes or increased penalties for any other disease. It must reflect modern science, and classification as a misdemeanor, not a felony. And I forgot to add this, but we were also, it was important to us to move this code from the criminal code over into the public health code. So our committee was made up, Elisa Howard, Cheryl Radiloff, regional chairs, myself, Stephen Page, and Chris Reynolds. So this is where we get into talking about strategy. So as some of you know, I'm also state lead for Positive Women's Network, and that's where I learned about strategy. Strategy is so important to like your long-term plans. So I cannot emphasize enough that no matter how little you know about HIV criminalization, before you do anything, please learn how to be strategic. Be strategic in every decision you make, from naming your coalition or group to who you invite to make decisions. You want to be strategic because you want voices at the table who are on both sides. But remember, if you offer a chair to just anyone, there are some people who will keep you from moving forward by refusing to show up, refusing to vote, and or speaking against the effort as a whole. Basically, they're not rowing in the same direction as you, and it's okay to outgrow people. So during our strategic planning meeting, the coalition decided to make all decisions based on consensus of members who were on the call. This became very important in the beginning because this was my very first time ever walking a bill from the beginning to the end like this. And to be honest, I didn't know the difference. So thankfully, we chose by consensus. That became important because later, during times whenever I was the only chair on the call, and that happened very often, whenever it was just me, Stephen, and Tammy, and sometimes Chris Reynolds, just another coalition member at the time, and nobody to make important decisions whenever we were on a deadline. So when we were at deadlines and had to make decisions, and again, I was a new advocate, at least in this work. So I was always worried about doing something wrong, saying the wrong things. But what I learned about consensus is that it taught me how important the difference is. Because if you want consensus and you're the only person there, then yes, we're moving forward. And that's seriously how we got this bill and we got this work done, is because sometimes me, Stephen, and Chris literally had to drag it into the future. And that's what you have to remember to do. Don't give up, just be strategic. So how do you offer someone from the counter side a chair and know that they're not going to hold you back? So make sure you do some homework on that person. Know that these are people who, even if they dislike other people in the community, you still see them working with that person to get things accomplished. That way, you know that even if they dislike you, they dislike your ideas, as long as what you're doing is going to promote the right thing, then morally, this is the type of person who's going to be obligated to help you. Surround yourself with allies who want the same thing as you, but who are also willing to tell you if you're being unreasonable. Many, many times, Stephen has had to reach out to me and pull me back in. So that's very important, especially for new advocates. If you're not like me, you're not working within an agency, someone who keeps you polished in that realm, you're not very political. Remember to surround yourself with allies. And remember, it's okay to be scared, confused, and even angry, as long as you use those emotions and feelings to grow. Communicate how you're feeling to someone that you trust, whether it be someone from CERO, someone from PWN, someone from your coalition. And ask for feedback and be ready to hear things that you may not want to hear, but that you need to hear. Remember that communication is a 6-lane highway and not a 2-lane street. So say what you mean what you say, and do your best to not say it in a mean way. Make your feelings known, own your space, and make others uncomfortable without being rude or disrespectful. That one was a hard one for me, but I'm almost there. What does that look like? The difference between pushing the growing edge and being rude is impact and clarity. We can speak in a firm, direct way without our words being rude or unnecessary. Do what I do and explain. Look, I'm only asking this question because I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to be rude or offensive. And if it sounds like I am, please just let me know. Be honest, like talk to people. These are just people. Even these senators and legislators, they're just people. Explain to them that, you know, you're looking for an answer. Maybe they have it. And if you do have issues with people on your coalition, outside of your coalition, it's best to not be confrontational. Email them privately and try to have that conversation via email, but privately. And do yourself a favor. Show up at every training and webinar that you have time, or request the video after if you're not informed on that topic. You're not going to be able to convince anyone to support you if you don't know what you're talking about. Moving on to the narrative. So how do you create a narrative? So we create a narrative. We create the narrative we want to use for our community by using information that is based in science, backed by multiple studies, and it's not stigmatizing. As well, your narrative must promote public health. When you use those ingredients, you leave zero room for argument. When I was trying to create our materials, I wasn't getting a lot of feedback on verbiage, so I decided to use the language we approved during our strategic planning meeting. Language that pushed the aspects of each issue and how the current language did not promote public health. The laws were based on fear and stigma from decades ago, and they were not based on science. So what was my narrative? For the laws, they must be based on science and not stigma, must have proof of a realistic transmission, and they must promote public health. So I'm going to show you some palm cards I created after I share the Denver principle slides. The palm card I created in 2019 as part of my PWN Year 3 Policy Fellowship Practicum project. When I was creating them, it was said by more than one person that I should be waiting for the task force on HIV exposure modernization that was going to be formed here in Nevada to actually form so that they could tell us what we should be saying and repeating to the community. But I would always explain back as politely as possible that in my role as state lead for PWN USA, we were trained that per the Denver principles, it's our responsibility to create the narrative that will be used for our community, especially when it comes to anything that will be used to target, criminalize, and or treat people living with HIV. So does everyone here know what the Denver principles are? Didn't want to waste a whole lot of time and I don't think it's wasting time, but we'll go over them just really quick. So the Denver principles were created in 1983, and there's no better way to cite the history of the people living with HIV/AIDS self-empowerment movement than to quote the principles articulated in Denver in 1983. They are as relevant and powerful today as they were then. So in June of 1983, at the 5th Annual Gay and Lesbian Health Conference in Denver, Colorado, a group of about a dozen gay men with AIDS from around the United States gathered to share their experiences combating stigma and advocating on behalf of people with AIDS. That manifesto became known as the Denver Principles. Statement from
Connie,
yes.
Can you just slow down just a little bit? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but our interpretation is having a hard time.
Oh, of course. I'm so sorry. It's I just get to rush. I will gladly slow down. So that manifesto became known as the Denver Principles. Statement from the Advisory Committee of the People with AIDS. We condemn attempts to label us as victims, a term which implies defeat, and we are only occasionally patients, a term which implies passivity, helplessness, and dependence upon the care of others. We are people with AIDS. Recommendations for all people. Support us in our struggle against those who would fire us from our jobs, evict us from our homes, refuse to touch us, or separate us from our loved ones, our community, or our peers. Since available evidence does not support the view that AIDS can be spread by casual social contact, not scapegoat people with AIDS, blame us for the epidemic, or generalize about our lifestyles. recommendations for people living with HIV or AIDS. Form caucuses to choose their own representatives to deal with the media, to choose their own agenda, and to plan their own strategies. You should be involved at every level of decision-making and specifically serve on the board of directors of provider organizations. Be included in all AIDS forums with equal credibility as other participants to share their own experiences and knowledge. Substitute low-risk sexual behaviors for those which could endanger themselves or their partners. We feel that people with AIDS have an ethical responsibility to inform their potential sexual partners of their health status. Rights of people with HIV or AIDS to as full and satisfying sexual and emotional lives as anyone else, to quality medical treatment and quality social service provision without discrimination of any form, including sexual orientation, gender diagnosis, economic status, or race, to full explanation of all medical procedures and risks, to choose or refuse their treatment modalities, to refuse to participate in research without jeopardizing their treatment, and to make informed decisions about their lives, to privacy, to confidentiality of medical records, to human respect, and to choose who their significant others are, and to die and to live in dignity. So this is my practicum card, the front of it. When we first started this, these were blank. Tammy helped me create, well, she went through like 70 rough drafts. Basically, we wanted to tell people simply and clearly, we have made significant advances in our scientific understanding of HIV and the medical interventions available to treat it. Our laws should reflect this progress. Living with a chronic illness should not be criminalized, but that is exactly what laws that use outdated language and science do. We offer elements of modernization that are based in science and not stigma, that ask for proof of transmission and intent, that require a realistic possibility of transmission and promote public health. So why are these current laws so problematic? They were created from a lack of information and science. At the height of the AIDS epidemic, there was little understanding of HIV and widespread concern about its transmission. Out of fear and limited scientific knowledge, many states enacted harmful and discriminatory laws that have done more harm than good. These statutes are unnecessary and counterproductive. They do not promote public health. There is no evidence that HIV criminalization laws promote public health. Many of these outdated laws discourage people from testing and getting into treatment, which we now know prevents the spread of HIV. They punish those who learn their status and privilege those who remain ignorant. They create mistrust of health professionals, making people who test HIV positive less likely to cooperate with partner notification, treatment adherence, and other prevention programs. These were the elements of modernization we offered on the back of the palm card. So if any statute criminalizing HIV must exist, it must meet the following criteria: proof of transmission. Any law criminalizing behavior that poses a risk of transmission or exposure to HIV should include proof of a realistic possibility of transmission, 2, the intent of the alleged perpetrator, and 3, non-disclosure. These laws should be based in science, not stigma. Laws should not criminalize behavior that poses no risk of transmission. This includes discriminatory penalty enhancing sentences for people with a known HIV status. And they must promote public health. So criminalizing HIV in broad terms or having poorly drafted legislation that allows for inappropriate application undermines the public health goals of such laws. They further marginalize and isolate communities of color, Latinx and immigrant communities, women, the LGBTQ plus communities, people in the commercial sex trade, and the community of people who use drugs. All of these communities are priority groups in every plan to end the HIV epidemic nationwide. So create the narrative you know that is based in science and not stigmatizing, and put it out as a standard. They will see you and repeat it if it's true. So those palm cards were created, like I said, in 2019. This is what the senator who supported our bill said just this year. These laws were not rooted in science, but in fear, have significant negative public health consequences for Nevada for decades. So create the narrative, and if it's right, they're going to use it because you've already done the work for them. And this lady, just side note, this lady is a badass. whenever we were testifying, any of the senators that came at us with any sort of stigmatizing comments or questions, she would answer them, and then she would bring it back and remind them that sort of mindset is why we're here in the first place. Everybody was so impressed with where we started and where we ended. I wish every state had one of her. She's amazing. So as some of you know, Marco was supposed to be here with us, and I'm going to play his video that he shared whenever we were creating the videos, and I hope that's okay. And I stole Jose's honorary for him. It was beautiful. One of Marco's favorite flowers is the sunflower. He taught us in the absence of light, sunflowers turn towards each other to find the light to survive and literally flourish. I can't imagine this world without your light, Marco. But we will face the world now to find light and survive and flourish as you would have wanted.
As a queer man living with HIV, the idea of potentially being put into jail because of my HIV status is an aspect of my life that I should not be dealing with at the moment. It's something that for my community, the Latinx community, what it does, it complicates our existence even more. We are already policed left and right just because of who we are. And on top of that, having to deal with HIV criminalization, what it does is that prevents for people to actually go and get tested, for people to get treatment, because of the fear that these laws instill in people. Sometimes people have been even deported because of their HIV status. And so the Latinx community has plenty of things to worry about. And then on top of that, having to deal with HIV criminalization. As a queer man living with HIV,
I think this is where you start, right, Stephan?
Absolutely. Just give me 1 second. Actually, I'm just going to ask for help here. Maybe Vanita, can you possibly help with Maria get her interpreter status on Zoom? I don't seem to have the right controls, but I want to make sure she gets added. Sorry, I couldn't help Maria.
Okay, Stephen, I'll do what I can. I'll start. I'm not sure. Okay.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, everyone. And hello. My name is Stephan. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Nevada HIV Modernization Coalition with Connie. I'm really happy you all decided to join us today. Connie gave a great overview of our whole coalition, a lot of the work that went into our bill. And as a lot of you know, our bill, Senate Bill 275, Nevada's HIV Modernization Bill, was just signed by the governor on Sunday, so just 3 days ago. So to talk about the bill, I want to back up a little bit. We're going to go all the way back to 2019 and talk about Senate Bill 284. This was a bill that was sponsored by Senator David Parks, an incredible LGBTQ elected official who has really pioneered LGBTQ legislation and has been a great ally to our HIV work as well. He wrote this bill in 2019 to establish the Advisory Task Force on HIV Exposure Modernization. So this task force was established in order to study Nevada laws that criminalize people living with HIV. And Connie, if you move on, I think more bullet points are going to show up if you click the next button. Perfect. The task force was also established to research the impact of these laws in Nevada, and also to identify any disparities in HIV-related arrests and prosecutions throughout the state. This task force allowed us to use government funds, or just to use the government really, to have a more official task force to study these laws. Of course, we know that the coalition was working on this before the task force was established, but the task force was a great help in making our work a little bit more official, I think, and giving us a little bit more standing, I would say. And next slide, Connie, or there might be one more bullet point. Oh, perfect. And I'll just add that the task force submitted its report in 2019 to the Legislative Council Bureau and the governor. That was back in last September, and that report was used to write the HIV modernization bill, Senate Bill 275. Connie, if you can click next a few more times. I'm not sure why I had the bullet points with this effect, but thank you. Perfect. So Connie covered this already a little bit, but our efforts in Nevada focused on laws that, first and foremost, criminalize the transmission of HIV more harshly than any other disease. We also focused on laws that add enhanced sentences for unlicensed sex workers who are living with HIV. We also focused on a whole plethora of laws that give health authorities wide latitude to investigate and control the spread of disease. And not just HIV, but actually any communicable disease in Nevada. Lastly, we also focused on a law that allows for the segregation of prisoners based on HIV status. We'll talk about all those laws a little bit more in depth in a second. But I did want to highlight that Nevada is a little bit unique in our HIV modernization work because we are the only state with a legal sex work industry. For anyone that doesn't know, our legal sex work industry is still a bit restricted. Both of Nevada's largest counties, Washoe County, which is Reno, and Clark County, which is Las Vegas, do not actually allow legal sex work. So it's all of the other counties that actually have the brothels and the legal sex work industry. Next slide, Connie. Before I talk about the bill, a super quick overview of our legislature here in Nevada. So all of this makes complete sense for everyone. And a few more details about the bill. It was sponsored by Senator Dallas Harris, which Connie talked about. And it was introduced in the Nevada Senate on March 18th, 2021. Nevada is also unique in that we only have a part-time state legislature. That means that we only meet every odd year from February to June, exactly 120 days, actually. That is a very short amount of time to get a lot of work done for 2 years, really. We won't meet again until 2023 unless the governor calls a special session for any reason. We have 21 senators and 42 assembly members. So there are 2 assembly districts in every Senate district. And the bill, this is how the bill was voted on. It had a complete unanimous vote in the Senate, 21 yeas and 0 nays. In the Assembly, it was a party line vote. We did have 26 yeas, all of the Democrats, and 15 nays, which was all of the Republicans except for one who was absent that day. And it was signed by the governor on Sunday, March 5th, 6th, Sunday, June 6th, rather. This wasn't updated as of Sunday, but yes, it was signed by the governor. And next slide, Connie. I'm actually going to, oh, yes, this is exactly where I want to be. Perfect. So what is in the bill? Most importantly, Senate Bill 275 completely repealed 5 very detrimental laws. First and foremost, NRS 201.205, I refer to as Nevada's primary criminalization statute. It made it a category B felony to knowingly or willfully engage in conduct that is likely to transmit HIV. As Connie talked about a bit before, this law problematic for so many reasons. It did not require intent to transmit. It did not require actual transmission. And that category B felony is extremely harsh when you consider the fact that the transmission of any other communicable disease in Nevada is a misdemeanor. So we repealed this law in its entirety. And that other law I mentioned that makes it a misdemeanor to transmit any disease in Nevada, that law will now apply to HIV. So now HIV is, in the sense of transmission, is treated like every other communicable disease in Nevada. We also repealed 2 laws that relate to sex workers and HIV. These laws could have led to a sentence enhancement for anyone doing illegal sex work who is found to be HIV positive. The first law mandated that a sex worker who is arrested be given an HIV test, but also charged $100 for that HIV test. As we all know, that's really unreasonable, especially when we consider the fact that you can go to most places and get a free HIV test. So it's really, did not make sense that they were charging people $100 for this. And again, the only reason for that HIV test would have led to a sentence enhancement. So both of those laws are also repealed. I mentioned earlier that we also repealed a law that allows for the confinement of people living with HIV. Actually, I did not mention this slide yet. But this law was extremely problematic. It actually incorrectly mentioned AIDS when it was talking about HIV. And again, there's no reason to confine people living with HIV. That was an archaic law. It does not make sense today. That is now repealed as well. And then lastly, this is the law that I mentioned earlier. We had a law that allowed for inmates to be segregated based on HIV status. This was included in our report, the task force report we submitted last year. But the Nevada Department of Corrections actually earlier this year in about January or February got in a lot of trouble from the federal government for having this law and this practice in place. So before this bill passed, the Nevada Department of Corrections already said they would stop this practice. But our bill also repealed the law, making it completely impossible for it to ever happen again. Okay, next slide, Connie. There's a lot more that this bill does too. Those were just the 5 laws that were repealed from the bill. I'll try to go through this somewhat quickly. The bill also amended several statutes relating to the authority of health departments. One law that required, or rather a change in our bill, would now require an order from a health department to be the least restrictive option to suppress, prevent, or control disease. And now with our bill, we also require documentation of the necessity of that order. Our bill also clarified some language around health departments' ability to enter private property, clarified language regarding occupation restrictions for people with the communicable disease. And we also clarified what isn't intentional behavior and what is not a violation of these laws. And all of these amendments were to ensure patient privacy, to ensure that health departments aren't overreaching in their abilities to control or investigate disease, and also just prevent, again, unnecessary criminalization of anyone living with any disease. Again, these laws were not HIV specific. They apply to all communicable diseases. So we want to make sure that everyone was protected with our changes. A few more things here. Our bill also added a statement of intent into state law, saying that all of our laws should use people first language that is respectful, and also we should remove duplicative references to either communicable diseases and HIV, or HIV and AIDS, or HIV and STDs. And our point with that was, singling out HIV in some of our state laws, a lot of the times was not, did not have any true reason, but was only really increasing stigma, kind of sending a message that, HIV is, worse than other communicable diseases, easier to transmit, or for some reason needs to stand out. We all know that is not true. So now the statement of intent ensures that any future laws are going to avoid all of that. And lastly, a lot of language changes to ensure that HIV and AIDS are used correctly in all state statutes. And also removing stigmatizing language like infected. And there are a ton of other really harmful words that don't even make sense in a medical or health setting, but have been put into state law and are now no longer there. Okay, next slide, Connie. Perfect. If anyone has any questions about that, I feel like that was a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time. Feel free to ask. But now that we passed our bill, I want to talk a little bit about how we got here, what we learned, and also where we are going. Connie talked about a lot of this already, but I just want to highlight that we got here through years of community organizing, relationship building, lobbying elected officials, studying state law, discussing different options for reform, meeting with stakeholders, and so much more. It was truly a team effort to get here. We've had so much support from national organizations, local and state groups here in Nevada. We'll talk a little bit more about all that help, I think, in another slide. But this was not an easy process, as Connie described earlier, but we got here. It did take a lot of hard work, but now that we are here, where did we go from here? First, actually, despite the prevalence of HIV stigma today, we learned that Nevadans were actually more ready than we expected to reform these criminalization laws. A prime example of that was the unanimous vote for our bill in the Senate. Not a single Republican, not a single senator at all voted against our bill. That was something that I definitely did not expect. And even when you look at the public comment and the testimony for our bill, there was actually, there was no opposition testimony at all. There was a lot of support testimony. There was some neutral testimony from some stakeholders who wanted some changes in our bill, but no public citizen and no organization testified in opposition of our bill. So I was personally very surprised by how ready Nevadans were for HIV modernization. A few more things about what we learned. Having a strong bill sponsor is everything. Connie talked about how amazing Senator Dallas Harris is. And truly, we are so grateful to have found such a wonderful bill sponsor who was not only willing to work with us, but was always ready to stand up for us, whether it was during committee hearings, with her colleagues, with different organizations. There's not enough I could say about Senator Harris. I also wanted to add that everything is better with increased collaboration. As we got closer and closer to where we are now, I would say that we interacted with more groups and had more help from others as well. Silver State Equality, Nevada's statewide LGBTQ org, really took us under their wing in late 2020. They sponsored us, giving us resources and funding, and that really helped us with all the work required for the bill this year. The Center for HIV Law and Policy as well. Great example of a group that came in to help us with our organizing, getting a better structure set up, and also with a lot of the legal logistics of our bill. And then lastly, what I'm already talking about really find the people and the organizations that will truly advocate for you. Connie mentioned that there are going to be some people, or rather there were some people we came across who seemed ready to support us, but we soon realized that they, maybe their interests didn't really truly align with us. Despite all of that, we did have a lot of people and organizations who were ready to support us and were truly ready to fight for us. I think we just had to get through all of those unsupportive folks and all those people against us to find the people that were really ready to fight for us. And once we found those people, it was just continued success from there, I would say. Next slide, Connie. Oh, perfect. This slide is here. I just want to give a super quick shout out to some of the groups we work with. I already talked about Silver State Equality. They, like I said, really took us under their wing, sponsored us, gave us resources and funding. Shearer Project, of course, the sponsor of HINAC, has helped us immensely, either with organizing, with little details. The amount of times that we email Tammy just with a quick question or some advice, I can't even describe how helpful Tammy and all of Shearer Project has been for us. I also mentioned that the Center for HIV Law and Policy helped us a lot with getting more organized, getting more structured, and a lot of the legal logistics. They actually wrote, I want to say most of our bill. The Center for HIV Law and Policy had a huge influence on the exact language of our bill. So we're immensely grateful for them for their legal knowledge, but also their ability to stand up for us as a coalition and use that legal knowledge to fight for us. A few more groups here. The Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law A lot of you may be familiar with the reports in California, Georgia, Florida. They requested similar data about HIV criminalization prosecutions here in Nevada, and are creating a similar report. I believe actually already created that report, and it is on their website. Positive Women's Network, Lambda Legal, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. I could spend all day thanking all of the groups that helped us. This isn't everyone. There are so many more people who got involved in our coalition. For the sake of time, I will leave it at that though. Perfect. A few more things moving forward. Something I forgot to mention, I think Connie mentioned though, Senate Bill 275 did renew the Advisory Task Force on HIV Exposure Modernization for the next interim. So now until the next legislative session in 2023. So during this next year and a half, we want to focus on these things. And when I say we, I mean both the task force and the coalition and everyone who works with us. We want to ensure diverse appointment to the task force. This was a huge issue when the task force was first established in 2019, or rather when appointments were first made in 2020. There were no women living with HIV appointed to the task force. Just one example of the lack of diversity there. Thankfully, Connie, other members of our coalition, and the Center for HIV Law and Policy were really persistent in their outreach to the governor's office to complete the rest of the appointments and to focus on diversity, especially women and women living with HIV. So now as we renew this task force, we want to prevent that problem from happening at all. We just hope that the appointments, the initial appointments, are diverse and representative of our community. We will continue meeting with community members and stakeholders. We had a lot of discussions with the health departments, for example. The firefighter unions also came in towards the end of our work with some things they wanted in our bill. So I think there are a lot of discussions that still need to be had so that we can perfect some of these laws in 2023. We'll continue reviewing state law to find more problematic laws in need of reform. Even with our task force report that was submitted in 2020, after that report was submitted, we continue to find more and more laws that were problematic. So it's almost seems like a never-ending process. You know, there's so much with our law that needs to be reformed. So this is work that will really be needed forever, I think. We'll also continue to grow the coalition, growing it in terms of people, of course, in terms of diversity, but also possibly expanding the issues that the coalition engages on. You know, we already passed our HIV modernization bill. Of course, we can improve on that with another bill in 2023, but we may even look at other issues, other HIV issues, other health policy issues, whatever it may be, other things that we can advocate for as a group in 2023. And with that, I think that leaves us with perfect time for questions. So I will leave open for questions. I'll check the chat first to see if anyone asked.
I haven't seen any questions in the chat, so you might just open it up, unless I'm missing the Q&A, if you want to open it up and people can get off mics or not, but I haven't seen any. People just been giving you guys a lot of love, or you all a lot of love for your work.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I guess with that, does anyone have any questions?
And folks are sharing and sending love to Marco, who is, I tried to bring into the room with a picture of Marco. So thank you.
And thank you, Vanita, for having the photo up for him. If nobody has any questions now, there were 3 questions asked on our Whova page for this session, and maybe we can talk about those a bit. The first one was, how can you control narratives when you cannot be heard? Connie, do you maybe want to talk about that a little bit, and then I can jump in too? Sorry to catch you off guard too if I did. Oh, you're on mute, Connie.
Thank you. So that's actually the issue that prompted me to want to do this workshop. Was I honestly felt like here in Nevada, I just wasn't being heard. You know, I used to work with two agencies that both dealt directly with people living with HIV, and I honestly felt like I was constantly being tokenized. So sometimes even if you're at the table, you're not actually at the table. So you can sit there and you can talk and talk and talk, but if your ideas are never actually coming to fruition, you're not being heard. So how do you control the narrative when that happens? You start your own group. You do it yourself. It's the worst and it's the hardest answer that I have to give, and I apologize for that, but you have to literally take control of, I'm not saying be a tank. I'm not saying plow through and make people do things. But what I'm saying is so like whenever I showed up at the very first task force meeting, I don't even know I had applied at that time, but I did not know who all the members were. So the very first time I showed up at this meeting, I'm sitting there and they're reading off and I'm there as just a public person. I'm not a part of the task force. I'm just part of the public showing up. All of the names they read, and at that time I didn't know Senator Dallas Harris, but her name's Dallas, so I assumed it was a guy. All of the names were men. And so that's literally what I said. I talked to Stephen, I'm like, were those all dudes? And he's like, well, yeah, all but one. And I'm like, it's like the senator's a woman. I'm like, well, does she have HIV? And he's like, I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so. So that right there, whenever you stand up and you tell, so I reached out to Tammy Howe, and because again, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it in a mean way. I reached out to Tammy Howe and I said, how do I tell these people that's not fucking okay without saying that's not fucking okay? And she told me, you're not allowed to speak for me. So I got up and I gave my public testimony and I told them there are no women living with HIV here. HIV affects women's bodies differently than it does men, and you are not allowed to speak for me. And you're not allowed to speak for my sisters. And I also had a whole bunch of the Davina, Alicia, a whole bunch of women from PWN showed up and were actually just sitting there on that call as part of the public. So that was very intimidating for them. So show up. If you cannot be heard, you get your sisters, you get your crew together and show up as a squad.
Already.
Because they're going to hear you. So that's how I did that. Was I formed my own little alliance here, pulled all of my sisters and all of my resources together, and I just let them know that you're not allowed to speak for us. And it worked, because no matter how badly people try to push you out, sometimes all you have to do is push back, and that's all it takes. You don't have to get angry. You don't have to be mad. Like, I actually didn't use any curse words at all. I just told them, you're not allowed to do that to us. And that's all it took. So sometimes, honestly, just having that gumption to reach out and ask somebody, am I allowed to stand up and push back? Yes, you are allowed to stand up and push back. So how do you do that? Push back.
Hi. Dorian Gray, I see your hand raised. Did you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Thank you guys for your work. I am in awe that you've got that bill passed and that you've made so much progress in a short amount of time. So my question is, how do you keep the momentum going if after a number of years, and you may not be able to answer this question, it feels like 51st dates So, you know, I've been around the block with it, and, you know, my state, and that's Louisiana. We have been talking about doing stuff, and we've had some cohesions, but there's never the momentum to engage early, to plan ahead, to really get involved, to get a bill written, if it's good or bad. Some of us are just tired of, you know, waiting until things can happen, because it's a coalition, right? And you're supposed to be working together, be on the same page, or at least the same book. And it's hard to do. So how did you guys do it, and how have you been able to get the momentum going to do what you did? Thank you.
I'll start, and Stephen can add anything I forget. It was a lot easier for us because they had been working on modernizing. Senator Parks and Antioco Corella here in Nevada had actually been working on this for about 4 or 5 years before we showed up. And they also could not get community support or involvement. And that was a senator and executive director. So my suggestion, they needed advocates to amplify the issue. You need a sponsor to push the bill. And I highly recommend working with the agencies that we talked about, like CHLP, the Center for HIV Law and Policy, as well as, I'm not sure, and I don't know if you have an equality federation in Louisiana, but if you could reach out to, like, if we can connect you with like Silver State Equality or Equality California, those groups right now are really pushing HIV mod bills. And whenever you get them on board, what they do is they reach out to your legislators and try and push these and amplify these issues. And that's what kept our momentum going. So we already had a senator who had been trying to do it. So like I said, we already had the groundwork laid for us, or at least the road graded. So it was a lot easier for us. If you don't have that, I definitely recommend doing a lot of HIV, what is HIV modernization on your, at like a Capitol Hill, you know, like go to your Capitol and start working on those people. And as soon as you get one of those sponsors, you tie those things together. Because you already, like, you yourself are the community amplifying. So as long as you have your sponsor and have someone that he can work with, like, make sure, like I said, Silver State Equality, the Williams Institute, and CHLP. Now, Zero Project has, I think, Brian Stevens. So they have legal support. You pull all of those people together, and that's the fuel for your momentum, in my opinion.
That's a great answer, Connie. I'm going to add a few things. The way I look at it, kind of like 3 pieces to this motivation. 1, finding the right people. We get a lot of people who say they're really interested, want to be involved in a coalition, ultimately don't really follow through. So I think just finding the people that actually are going to commit to what they say and stay involved with us regardless. Part of how to get there, I guess the number 2 in my mind of these bullet points, collaborating with other organizations. And of course, we had a lot of organizations help us, but also maybe just finding ways to work together, especially on events and such. We had multiple partnered events at points with HRC, Silver State Equality, even before they sponsored us, with Planned Parenthood here. And that was great for 2 reasons. It helps get our name out there to their members. If we're working on an event with Planned Parenthood, that opens up our audience to all of Planned Parenthood's members. And from that, some of their members are going to get involved with us from attending the event. People who maybe had no idea what we were working on, but because of their commitment to Planned Parenthood, are now also interested in our movement. And then I guess the last point also, making sure that you're internally very organized and structured. You know, I think we've gotten so very organized at this point now to where we are now, but it was a process to get there. I'd say in the beginning of our coalition being established, there were definitely some meetings where I guess there's a mood of we're all in this boat, but who's driving the boat, you know? So we definitely had some of those meetings, but we worked really hard to get more organized and more structured, and that helps retain people in our movement, right? If people show up at your meeting and it's a shit show, sorry for my language, then they might not want to stay. So we worked really hard to get our own movement just more organized, that people saw that and decided to stay involved with us. And I'll leave it at that.
Those were great points. I actually forgot about the getting organized part. That was something that Marco was mentoring me while he was in Nevada, and like every other month we would do like a call, and that was exactly what he said to me. He's like, Connie, he's like, and I think he may have even used shit show, but he's like, nothing is organized. Nobody knows where anything's at. We don't know where to find any information. Nobody knows what your coalition is doing. So Marco is the very reason that we have a newsletter. It's like everything that we have a landing page where people can go, everything that houses our information, our guiding principles. We didn't have any of that created before he was like, you're not organized and nobody's gonna, that's exactly what he said to me. And that's thank you for saying that, Stephen. That's a great place to start, Dorian, right there. And if you need help, I do a newsletter. I use Constant Contacts. It does cost $20 a month, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. It houses all of your email, and you don't have to use Constant Contacts. Like you can do email or MailChimp or something, but that's a great place to start.
We're down to the, go ahead, Stephen. We're down to the last 3 minutes, so I just want to remind everyone.
Thank you, Vinita. I was going to say the same thing. Any last questions in these last 3 minutes?
I just want to thank you all so much for showing up today. I can't wait till we can do this in person again. I miss hugs. I went to my first event Sunday when the governor signed the bill. And I think I hugged everybody, whether they asked for it or not. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. So I can't wait to get hugs from everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I just want to say this is my first HiNAC also, so I just feel really honored to be here with all of you. So thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing this space with me. And I hope you guys learned something today from our session.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.